of the President-elect Trump. And I would like to share with you my perspectives on that. I have just published today, as you may read or not, a very long, detailed article about that specific issue, the legacy or the Middle Eastern legacy of President Obama. Obviously, during the next 15-minute presentation, I will try to share with you the bullet points of that analysis. As a start, I would say that the tectonic plate movement that we see in the Middle East happened mostly during the shift of President Barack Obama, the double shift starting in 2008. I have to be very clear and say that to a large extent, obviously, neither President Obama nor the previous administrations are responsible for the huge factors that are shaping this tectonic plate movement that we see in the Middle East, meaning what is known as the Arab Spring, the challenges of the societies, the Sunni Shiite power struggle, the growing Iranian-Arab power struggle, and so on. These are all things that are very much embedded within the history of the Middle East, and not something that came for the first time during the presidency of Barack Obama, neither the presidency of Bush or previous American presidents. However, when we look and try to sum up the major legacy of President Obama during those 8, I would say, enormously dramatic years, and mostly starting from the late of 2010 in the context of the Middle East, I think it would be accurate to indicate that the major cornerstone of President Barack Obama's presidency was extending his hands towards the Iranian mullah regime, which, of course, to a large extent creates a lot of puzzles and questions among many people in the region for different obvious reasons. When you look today in the Middle East and the big tectonic plate movement in the region, the center of this tectonic plate movement that we see today in the Middle East is actually located, roughly speaking, in the area stretching from Iran all the way west towards the Mediterranean. What we see today in this region is an enormously dramatic geostrategic reshaping of the Middle East, characterized first and foremost with the disintegration of major Arab states, Syria and Iraq, which actually joins the slippery slope towards disintegration of another yet an Arab state located on that corridor stretching from Iran to the Mediterranean, and this is Lebanon. There are different reasons for the process that we see and witness both in Syria, Iraq, and Lebanon for this disintegration or the huge challenges that those states are facing. Some of these factors are similar, some of them are different and vary from one place to another. However, the one major common denominator, when you look at the reality shaped today in this region, the common denominator is the proactive, violent involvement of the Iranian mullah regime in what happens within those states. As a fact today, looking at the region stretching from Iran to the Mediterranean, we are witnessing the presence of some 100,000 estimated Shiite militants. We are talking about Afghans, Iraqis, Lebanese, the Hezbollah, of course, Pakistanians, in addition to Iranian Revolutionary Guards and military forces that are operating militarily both in Iraq and Syria, and obviously Hezbollah in Lebanon since the beginning of the 80s. This process is further fueling the major Sunni Shiite power struggle, and also it is encompassed with the process of the, practically speaking, abolishment of borders between Iran and all the way straight to the Mediterranean. Borders does not really exist anymore in the full sense between Iran and Iraq, between Iraq and Syria, and between Syria and Lebanon. So actually what we are looking at is a very interesting geostrategic development, and the center epic of that development is a creation of an Iranian-influenced corridor stretching straight from Iran all the way westwards, ending at the shores of the Mediterranean in Lebanon. The Iranian regime, by the way, openly speaks about the fact that he views Iran's Western strategic borders as the Mediterranean, not Iraq. This development is the major development from a geostrategic perspective that took place during the shift of President Barack Obama. And my argument is that that development, which has a lot of substantial ramifications and already current outcomes on the ground, that process could have not take place the way it did without the extending hand of Obama's administration to Iran. As a fact, what we see today is that there is an intensive process of disintegration of Iraq and Syria, resulting in a growing violence in those areas that is, of course, spreading. The disintegration or the abolishment of the borders, as I mentioned before, and one other very significant potential ramification is in the context of another yet major player in that region, which has not been mentioned so far, and that is the State of Israel. As of now, not so far from the Israeli-Syrian ceasefire line in the Golan Heights, we have a presence of an Iranian-backed militias, Afghans, Pakistanians, Lebanese Hezbollah, in addition to Iranian regular forces and experts that are deployed in different parts of Syria. Some of them are deployed a couple of miles away from the Israeli-Syrian ceasefire line in the Golan Heights. The Iranian regime does not conceal its intention and its blueprints regarding the way he views Israel's fate, which, of course, as you probably know, the Iranian regime calls for the elimination of the State of Israel, and indeed, different speakers of the Iranian regime have spoken about it very openly. That development on the ground, which already exists, is enormously disturbing because one could not exclude the possibility that at one day, at some circumstances, the Iranian regime will decide, under the whatever the excuse is going to be, to activate this deployment that exists already on the ground in Syria. Israel has been acting more than once, hundreds of miles away from its borders, to intercept the shipment of an Iranian weapons to factors that was supposed to be used against Israel. Therefore, it would be very unlikely to expect that Israel will sit and do nothing if the Iranian regime will try to further strengthen and create a base in the area of the Golan Heights in Syria from which further attacks will be launched against Israel. In fact, Israel already had sent a couple of very clear signals and messages to the Iranian regime in that context in the past. The potential of growing Israeli-Iranian clash in the area of Syria and Lebanon has dramatically increased in the last couple of years. And if such scenario, if the Iranian aggressive expanding the region is not going to be thwarted or restrained, the odds for such collision significantly rise. The ramifications of such development are global. In the end of the day, hence, when we are talking about the major issue of the Middle East today, trying to understand what is the major core of this tectonic plate movement, and as I said, this is the dramatic reshape of the region stretching from Syria, from Iran, all the way to the Mediterranean. In the context of President Barack Obama's legacy, one can come to the conclusion that in the end of the day, unfortunately, extending hand to the Iranian mullah regime resulted in a growing whirlpool of violence in the Middle East. We already witnessed that reality on the ground, both in Iraq and Syria. And as I mentioned before, unless that development is going to be restrained and even pushed back, it is very likely that the whirlpool of violence will continue spread and widen in the region. Obviously, one of the most puzzling aspects of that is the question, why did Barack Obama's administration insist to continue to extend his hand to the Iranian mullah regime when it was already clear that extending hand to the Iranian mullah regime results already very dramatic and mostly negative changes on the ground. There are different possible answers to that question. I must admit that I do not have the answer. I think that the only person that has an answer to that question is President Barack Obama himself, which maybe one day he will share with us in his memoirs. So as of now, to conclude that issue, I would say that at the beginning of 2017, when you look at the whole picture of the Middle East, and mostly when you look at the center epic of the huge dramatic reconfiguration of the area stretching from Iran to the Mediterranean, that development with all the aspects that I was describing earlier could have not taken place the way it did without the extended hand of the American administration under the leadership of President Barack Obama for the last 8 years to the Iranians' mullah regime. That's the reason why I say that in the end of the day, the legacy of President Barack Obama in the context of the Middle East is enormously dramatic. I would even argue that it is not less dramatic than the ramifications of what is known as the SKYPE agreement during the First World War and what was established on the ground following the First World War in the Middle East. I would argue that the ramifications of Barack Obama's policies in that context are not less dramatic. As of now, unfortunately, it is mostly negative and destabilizing. President-elect Trump and the new administration is facing a Middle East that is experiencing not only a whirlpool of violence, but also experiencing a growing whirlpool of violence. That is my part of the presentation, and at this point you are very welcome to come forward with your questions. Let me just remind you that I'm always saying to my audience that question is a short sentence that ends with a question mark. Thank you for your attention. And again, I do apologize for the technological challenges.
So if anybody is interested in placing a question for Avi, please go ahead and unmute yourself and pose a question. Anybody have any questions out there? Can you hear me? Nope.
Yeah, can hear you.
Sure. Who's it?
No, it's Jeremy, but I don't have a question. Not right now. I'm just suffering from shock right now.
You're suffering from shock?
I didn't realize you were going to say it quite so harshly.
I hope that you're okay.
Anybody else would like to pose a question? Jolie, maybe would you like to say something?
I have a question. I'm Jolie Pillsbury from Arlington, Virginia. And the question is that recently in the paper yesterday they were talking about Russia and Turkey and the potential implications for the United States. And I just wondered if you could comment a bit on those dynamics.
Yes, definitely. Guys, once again, I have to ask you, please mute your mics because some mics are open and I hear the background noises and it's a little bit disturbing. Thank you. Joy, can you hear me? Okay. Regarding your question, when you look at this big picture that I was, in a bullet points portraying, one can say that currently the big winner, sort of speaking, is Putin. Through its intervention in the war in Syria, Putin actually have acquired a very important strategic card to negotiate. And it's very clear that President-elect Trump recognized that, and he was sending a couple of signals basically saying, I understand that if we want to talk about future arrangements, we have to talk with Russia because Russia becomes a very significant player in that context. Turkey also comes along in that context. And actually, it's very interesting when you talk specifically about the issue of Syria, because as of now, as an outcome of the Russian involvement in Syria, which actually is the outcome of a specific Iranian request, One has to remember that in September 2015, when Russia went in proactively and militarily involved in the war in Syria under the title of fighting terror, which of course was only a disguise, that was based upon a specific Iranian request because Assad's situation at that time was very dire. And Putin does not give a free meal. Putin's interest in Syria do not necessarily overlaps or comply with the Iranians' interest. Putin is very much tuned to the messages coming from Israel. Israel actually, for example, expect the Golan Heights to be calm, and Putin clearly echoes that Israeli interest to the Iranians. Putin is very much tuned to the Turkish messages, and Turkey, in return, of course, is very much tuned to Putin's interest. And it's very interesting because President-elect Trump is stepping into, when we talk specifically about the issue of Syria, he's stepping in a very interesting arena where there is, at least potentially, a possibility to cut a deal, sort of speaking, where the major factors involved in that deal will be, of course, Putin, the United States of America, Turkey, and the Syrian, both the Alawites minority as well as the Sunnis. If such a scenario is going to take place, that will be very interesting because it means that the Iranians, to a large extent, will have to compromise their interest in Syria because one has to remember a very significant fact, and that is that only a couple of years ago, the only players in Syria were Assad and the Iranians. Today, they are no longer the only player, and they are not in the same strength position they used to be earlier. So I would say that is a major guiding line for the new incoming American administration. Russia, mostly because of its presence in Syria, Russia is a major factor to dialogue with in order to try and to cut a deal. No solution is possible in the context of Syria without the proactive role of Putin and Russia at this phase.
Thank you very much.
I hope that I answered your question.
You did, and I look forward to one of your predictions.
Avi, this is Ken Greenberg. I have a question.
Sure.
Just yesterday, I think it was, before he went out, still, President Obama made a comment again in his talk about the Middle East that, and this is something that Kerry echoed once, we've heard already, it's a new line they seem to have, that Israel can't be Jewish and a democracy. And of course, there's this whole Paris meeting, which can't end well. So if you could comment on that, the line, where you think they're going with all of this stuff.
Well, I don't think that particular anything is going to be coming out of that specific conference in France, nor the recent announcement made by Secretary of State Kerry, nor President Barack Obama. I think that the most important thing to understand is that if we are talking about President Barack Obama's legacy, I think that in the context of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, unfortunately, it seems like as if the administration, the retiring administration, has kind of like echoed the concept that solving the Israeli-Palestinian conflict actually will solve the challenges of the Middle East, which I don't necessarily subscribe to that concept. It's not to say that the Israeli-Palestinian conflict should not be at hand, because it's very significant, but I think it's very important in the end of the day to remind ourselves the important mantra, if I may say, and the mantra is the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is not shaping the Middle East. The Middle East is shaping the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. The Israel-Palestinian conflict is yet a conflict out of many other conflicts in the region, not the biggest one and not the most central one. We all see what happens today in different parts of the Middle East where it has nothing to do with the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. And it has to be addressed, but I think it has to be addressed in the right proportion, and it has to be addressed mostly in the understanding of the relations between that specific conflict and the large picture of the Middle East. The Paris conference obviously does not echoes that understanding, neither unfortunately, the statements made by Secretary of State, Mr. Kerry. And again, not to negate the importance of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, I think when you address the challenge of the Middle East and the challenges of the Middle East, it is very important to understand the right portion and the right proportions of the different factors that are involved. As a side note, I could add that the events in the Middle East, which to a large extent, as you could see and understand, the war in Syria, the situation in Iraq, the situation in Lebanon, Yemen, Libya, Egypt, and so on, which has nothing to do with the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, of course, impact the Palestinian-Israeli conflict in a couple of different ways. One of them, for example, is the fact that the Palestinians themselves are very much aware of the message that comes out from the Arab world, which actually says, we are now very much busy with our own challenges. So you, the Palestinians, you should deal with your own issues. The Palestinians are aware of that. This is very significant because the meaning of that is that if only a couple of years ago the Israeli-Palestinian conflict was an Arab affair, today it is an Israeli-Palestinian affair. This is a big difference which has a lot of ramification. The events in the Middle East accelerate an interesting discussion within Palestinians themselves regarding their way, their path. For example, the split between Hamas and the Palestinian Authority has many components that actually echoes the big picture that we see today in the Middle East. For example, in the context of the very well-known slogan of the resistance, one of the major concepts that you cannot understand the Middle East without understanding this concept. It has been very popular, very out there in the discussion of the people of the Middle East in the last generation, mostly in the context of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. The concept of the resistance, for example, was very significant in the mindset of the people of the Middle East, where actually figures like Hassan Nasrallah, the leader of Hezbollah, or Bashar al-Assad, the president of Syria, only a couple of years ago were admired and viewed as an icons and symbols within large parts of the Arab world because they have been identified with the camp of the resistance, meaning the camp that is leading the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, and in the sense that it's trying to end or to eliminate the existence of Israel. Obviously today, Assad and Nasrallah are to a large extent loathed by large parts of the Arab Sunni world because, of course, their role in the war in Syria. So there is a sense of a sovereign in the Arab world, basically along the line that says this whole concept of resistance that was very present and powerful in the mindset was actually one big deception, and we people in the Arab world have been deceived by that. And that discussion in the Arab world percolates very strongly within the Palestinians themselves. If you notice the exchange of accusation between the Palestinian president Mahmoud Abbas and the leadership of Hamas, the Palestinian president major line is that he actually says to Hamas, your way of the armed resistance led the people of Gaza Strip to a disaster. This is a wrong way. Hamas, on the other hand, not so surprisingly, accuses Mahmoud Abbas in abandoning the way of the resistance. So it's one example that shows you how the dramatic change and events in the Middle East impact the discussion within the Palestinians themselves, and obviously impact furthermore in the context of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. This is a great example that actually manifests what I've been saying all along the way. The Middle East is shaping the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, not the other way around.
Thank you, Avi. That was quite thorough.
Thank you.
Hi, Avi. Can you hear me? Patricia Rabbits. I'm in California, in the Bay Area.
Hello.
Hi. I just wanted to take a moment to thank you for your book, Inside the Middle East. I'm in the middle of the last chapter. I would say I learned a lot, but I'm still incredibly confused. So now I'm going to pivot to a question.
Okay.
So I'm a strong supporter of Barack Obama. And I recognize the complexity of the issues that we're facing in the Middle East. And the concerns here were really about the Iranian nuclear program and working out that agreement. And so I'm curious how you would have liked to have seen things unfold, where you feel like the Obama administration went sideways and what you see as a correction course at this point.
Well, first of all, thank you very much. I'm very flattered and honored. I totally understand your sense of confusion. All I can say is I've been dealing with the Middle East for something like 40 years. I understand nothing. So don't feel bad about it.
Glad I'm not alone.
I'm trying to decode this complex picture as much as possible, as a professional way as possible. I have to emphasize that my analysis regarding Obama's administration Middle East policy is not a political one. It actually tries to reflect from an intelligence perspective the seemingly picture as it is today in the beginning of 2017, and it's very important for me to say that. It is by no way any kind of like a personal statement regarding President Barack Obama or any other, of course, American politicians, leaders, and so on and so on. Regarding to your question, I will try to reflect it from a different perspective. As a fact, and I believe that I'm not wrong saying that, because I'm following on a constant daily basis many comments, articles, analysis, arguments, and so on, discussions within the Arab world. The major criticism within the Arab Sunni world, which is majority of the Muslims, like 85% or 87% of the Muslims, and of course the Arabs as well, are Sunnis. The major criticism is that they, in their mind, the Barack Obama administration lined up with the Iranians and the Shiites. And as far as the Muslim Arab Sunni world is concerned, this is the wrong choice. They have, as far as they are concerned, they have a very good reasons to be very critical because, as I mentioned before, when you look today on the ground, on the reality, the fact is that you see a very proactive, aggressive involvement of Iran in states that are predominantly Arab Sunnis. Syria is a one, Lebanon, Iraq, even though majority of the Arabs in Iraq are Shiites, the majority of the people in Iraq are Sunnis because the Kurds in Iraq are Sunnis, even though they are not Arabs. The bottom line is that in the eyes of the Arab world, the administration, Obama's administration, have basically totally disbalanced a very delicate equilibrium that used to exist between the Sunni Arab camp on the one hand and the Iranian Shiite camp on the other hand. To that, we have to add something else which is very significant, mostly because the average, I would assume, and I don't think that I'm wrong on that, because the average viewer in the West is not exposed to the daily scenes that the average viewer in the Arab Muslim Sunni world is exposed in the context of what is going on mostly in Iraq and Syria. Arab Sunni platforms of information, open sources are suffocated with both reports and as well as footages and video pieces allegedly documenting atrocities conducted by Shiite militias in Iraq and Syria. There are rumors / reports about raping of women by Shiite militias, about ethnic cleansing, and so on and so on. We have to remember that these things are fueling a growing anger within the Arab Muslim Sunni world, and that, of course, is being translated into a growing violence, as I mentioned before. As far as the Arab Muslim Sunni world is concerned, they mostly attribute that development, they hold the Obama's administration responsible for that. There is some kind of like unjust aspect to that, because in a way, one can say that the United States is them if it is and them if it's not. But it's important for me to try and to echo to you the sentiments that are very much out there in the Muslim Arab Sunni world, assuming that you are not necessarily exposed to those sentiments on a daily basis. I would even further share with you an interesting piece of information which may totally surprise you, but it's there. Because of the disappointment, discontent of the Sunni Arab world with what they perceive to see as the imbalanced US policy, mostly in the sense of lining up with the Iranian regime, it has come to the point that in the eyes of many Sunnis, the United States under Obama's administration was using the issue called ISIS as a tool or as a card to actually disguise a United States-Iranian cooperation. Many people in the Arab Sunni world seriously argue that the United States and Iran actually plays with this card called ISIS in order to justify and legitimize the taking over of Iraq and Syria by Iran. It's out there in the Sunni discussion. Furthermore, there are people in the Arab Muslim Sunni world who seriously argue, and it's out there, it's in the discussions, you could read it in columns, you could read it in analysis. I heard people, some of them are very serious people, saying that in the Arab world, that argue that the United States of America, together with Iran, sometimes some people also add Israel into this package, actually created ISIS deliberately. The rationale beyond this quite distorted line of thinking, the Sunni rationale is very logic in the sense that the Sunni says, well, Iran is a big enemy of ISIS and other Sunni radical groups. So if the United States lines up with the Iranians to fight the Sunni militant groups like ISIS or like al-Nusra or like Al-Qaeda and so on, the outcome of that is boomeranging, because the outcome of that is that more and more Sunnis are now joining those groups because they view that as a fight against the Shiites and the Iranians, which of course they are loathing. So you could see the loop or the challenging loop that is kind of like very much out there common in the mindset of people in the Muslim Arab Sunni world. So I think trying to convey the way things are viewed in the Arab and Muslim Sunni world in the context of Barack Obama's legacy is one aspect. Then there is another interesting aspect, and this is the Shiite one, which is very interesting. One could have expected that following the clearly extended hand of Barack Obama to Iran, there will be a kind of like reciprocity. Unfortunately, it does not take place. It seems like the more President Obama was extending its hand to Iran, it did not meet an extended hand in exchange, which also is very puzzling in terms of the way trying to understand the rationale beyond the extending hand to Iran. Obviously, the major topic of the joint plan of action, what is known as the deal that was signed with Iran, the 5+1, regarding Iran's nuclear military project, also raises many puzzling questions. Again, as you could understand following my presentation, as far as the Muslim Arab Sunni world is concerned, that deal actually opens and paves the way for the Iranians to further complete their project and therefore, of course, to lay another significant component in the structure that the Iranians are now trying to build, basically by weakening the concept of statehoods in the Arab world and creating a lot of more and more chaotic situation because it plays to the hands of the Iranian regime. This is the way it's being viewed by the Arab Sunni world. So all in all, when you look at that, you could see that from the Sunni Arab perspective, you can understand the mindset or the rationale beyond their criticism of the Obama's administration. Now, what are the way to correct this? That's a big question. I mean, again, and I have to re-emphasize what I said in the beginning. Obama's administration is not responsible for the major flaws and the major factors that really fuels this huge tectonic plate movement that we see today in the Middle East. Neither the Bush administration, by the way. There have been a lot of mistakes being done by all previous American administration. But there is a big difference between making a mistake and, of course, being responsible for such a chaotic situation as we see today in the Middle East. What can be done, what should be done? Well, that's obviously a major question, which, of course, the President-elect Trump and the new administration will have to confront and will have to address. I would say that there should be a couple of guiding lines regarding that question. First, what happens in the Middle East does not stay in the Middle East. I think that we have a couple of good examples of that, and we have to be aware of that. The Middle East is by far too important to be left aside. And for the United States of America, I believe that strategic interest is to be able to ensure its interest in the Middle East, because in the end of the day, it goes back to the interest of the United States globally. So this is, I think, some kind of like opening guiding lines. Now, I believe that the major guiding line of the new administration coming in, trying to address the challenges of the Middle East, should be based upon the concept that says, identify the players involved, identify the real interests, identify the handles and the leverages that you could use as the United States in a very delicate diplomatic multi-track negotiations and dialogues in order to be able, in the end of the day, to shape reality in the Middle East that, as much as possible, would be beneficial in context of the United States interest and the context of the region itself. And the major task is actually to try to stabilize today a region that is going through this growing destabilization and growing whirlpool of violence. I think that a major guiding line should be the concept that I call you win some, you lose some, meaning trying to identify the interest of the factors involved, where are the places and the topics that they can compromise, what are the major topics and arenas they will not compromise, what could be compensating in return for compromise, and so on and so on. And when you look through that lenses and you look at the different arenas, I think that it's interesting to see that practical achievements can be done. A good example for that is what happened just recently in Lebanon. For more than 2 years, the Lebanese politicians failed to choose a new president. That reflects, first and foremost, the fact that Lebanon is a major stage of a power struggle between Iran and Saudi Arabia, as part of the big power struggle between Iran and Saudi Arabia and different parts of the Middle East. Recently, there was a breakthrough when the Sunni leader, Hariri, announced that there was an agreement with the Christian candidate, General Michel Aoun, that is the one that was preferred by the Hezbollah and hence the Iranians to be the president. And there was an agreement. Hariri removed his objection, and the way was open for the agreement that actually ended in Aoun becoming the new president of Lebanon and Hariri becomes once again the prime minister of Lebanon. It happens because it was first and foremost the outcome of an Iranian-Saudi Arabian understanding. And that understanding was along the lines of you win some, you lose some. Each side, the Iranians and the Saudis, in the context of Lebanon, can say, well, we won something, we lost something. It's about half the cup that is full and half the cup that is empty. And such approach could be applied, of course, in a different dimensions in other places, like Syria, for example. Next month, there's supposed to be a very important sessions in Kazakhstan regarding the political fate of Syria. The major rebels body, the Syrian rebel bodies, are already participating in that. Such political understanding regarding maybe some kind of a political solution in Syria could be achieved. It has to be, again, guided by the lines of you win some, you lose some. It has to take into consideration the interest of Russia, meaning recognizing Russia's presence in Syria as a legitimate one, the military presence. It has to recognize the interest of the Turks, preventing the formation of a Kurdish autonomy in the northern part of Syria. It has to take into consideration and express the fact that overwhelming majority of the Syrians are Sunnis, and therefore they should be the major factor involved in the shaping of the future of Syria. And at the same time, it has to ensure and secure the future of the other ones, the minority who ruled Syria for almost half a century. It's a very complex fabric, but it can be achieved because such an agreement that will be based upon the guiding lines of you win some, you lose some, could be backed and supported by the major player. The United States of America definitely, in my view, should be part of that. The European Union, the Arab Gulf states, the major Arab states should be involved in that. In the case of Syria, such an agreement will be on the expense of the Iranians, but it is already in a given reality on the ground. So the Iranian could face a done deal in Syria that may not comply with their interest because it reflects a certain reality in Syria. But then the Iranian could be compensated in another arena, which is the Iraqi arena, where the Iranians have a very strong, valid interests. So this is an example that how do you create through a very delicate systems of give and take, win and lose, and understanding in different arenas currently that are very turbulent in the Middle East in order to try to gain stability back on the ground. And as you probably noticed, I was not necessarily talking about military involvement of the United States of America. It was mostly through the diplomatic and political engagement.
Thank you very much. Of course, we're hopeful here that the Trump administration will have some sense of nuanced negotiation and the ability to win some and lose some. I'm not really seeing that in anything he says, but we'll hope for that. I also hope that you're coming to the Bay Area. I see you through another tour, and I'll be tracking where you're going to appear. A lot of us would love to hear you speak again.
Thank you very much. I'll be very happy to do it. Actually, there is a possibility. It's kind of like on it, early diapers, sort of speaking, but I'll be very happy, of course, to come back again to the Bay Area. I've been there many times. It's always wonderful. I had wonderful events there, and I do hope that it will take place. You're very welcome to follow the updates on my blog and where I'm informing about where I'm going to be and what's my itinerary and schedule is going to be like. And I really hope that I could once again visit the Bay Area. Obviously, I'll be very happy. By the way, it's interesting because many people argue that because of the business record of Mr. Trump, President-elect Trump, that may facilitate, sort of speaking, a kind of like much more down to business approach, which maybe could be to the better in the context of the Middle East. Maybe.
Well, like I said, we're crossing our fingers, and we'll be out on the streets demonstrating to push him in the direction of diplomacy. For sure. Also, just a quick suggestion, because I think I'm a typical American reader trying to educate myself. Anytime you can put in maps, charts, things to help us kind of track what you're saying. I found myself going back and forth at maps, trying to get a sense of boundaries, because I think it is really critical that Americans become more educated about what is going on in the Middle East and have a more kind of complex understanding of the situation.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I do try to incorporate at least some basic, facilities like maps and so on. Try to just visualize the picture. I do totally share your opinion. There is a lot of need in further educating. I would even say that there is a need, I think, to change the lenses through which the Middle East is viewed in centers of policy making and in academia and intellectual centers in the West. I think it's the strategic interest of the United States. This is, by the way, our major task in the program that I'm conducting within the Eisenhower Institute in Gettysburg College, a program called Inside the Middle East Intelligence Perspective. We're really trying to provide students with a new lenses to look at the Middle East that will be much more helpful in providing these people the ability to try and to navigate more accurately or to dialogue more accurately with a very complex reality such as the reality of the Middle East. But of course, your remark is enormously important and valuable. I do hope, by the way, that you have received or saw the article that I just published today, basically elaborating on the whole issue of the legacy of Middle Eastern legacy of President Barack Obama, which I believe adds more aspects and dimensions.
Thank you. I'll check my email to see. And is it on your blog? Is the article there?
Yes,
it's also posted
there, and it was just actually published today. It's kind of like preface to this evening seminar or evening briefing that we are just conducting. So
it's also posted as a link here on the sidebar of your chat.
Right.
I'll check that out. Thank you so much for your work and working to educate all of us so we can be more thoughtful and informed as we make our opinions and try to navigate what is really just a completely confusing situation. I mean, it's a book where I kept thinking, okay, so who's the good guy? Oh, no, it's not that. I mean, you just cannot simplify it on that level. It is so complex.
Yeah, I mean, this is a very accurate observation. One of the things that I think that I try to convey through the book is the knowledge that the people of the Middle East doesn't necessarily think in English. It's a different mindset, sort of speaking. But this is a very accurate observation. It is a very complicated and complex reality. It cannot be viewed through a flat, two-dimensional, sort of speaking. As I'm saying, like when you go to watch a three-dimensional movie, you must have these glasses because otherwise you won't be able to see the movie. And this is, I think, a good analogy when you talk about the Middle East. You need this three-dimensional picture when you try to really understand the movie called the Middle East.
Indeed. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Well, it's almost... we're almost in the end of this briefing, which is, as I said, is supposed to be 1 hour. I want to thank you all for your participation. I hope that you found this briefing educational and meaningful. I do intend in the future to actually establish structure, sort of speaking, such briefings that will be periodically probably in the frame of maybe once every couple of weeks, maybe once a month, or even once every 2 weeks. And hopefully that will be another good frame and platform to contribute, hopefully, for a better understanding of this complex reality. In fact, my upcoming briefing, I don't have the date yet, but my upcoming briefing hopefully will actually I will celebrate, if that's the right word, the publication of my book, Inside the Middle East, Intelligence Perspective, that was published almost a year ago. And in my upcoming briefing, I will actually compare the predictions that I provided in this book with the current reality of the Middle East 1 year after this book was published. I believe it will be interesting and meaningful. At this point, I want to thank you all very much for participating. Wish you good health and joy. And until our next meeting.
Thank you, Avi.
Bye-bye. Take care. Be well.
Bye, everyone.